it is outside the Chief Executive's delegated authority. So are there any questions?
Okay, we've got Gary first, thanks.
Thank you, thanks, Steph. Okay, the remissions for 4.3 million. Is there any 10-year plan impact in this? Because sorry, just to put it in context, because the theory would be no, because there's actually $4.3 million worth of not needed infrastructure to pay for. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, but is that real? But, you know, in terms of, are we doing this on a what do you call it? Average cost basis or a what's the other way? Incremental cost basis type thing.
This would be, I would call, more real than the model. The model assumes a lot of things, and this is when we step outside of that process and use actual numbers backed up by quite a high threshold for evidence,
okay.
And use those instead. So this is a higher level of certainty.
Scrutiny type thing, yeah. Okay. All right. So because I mean that's a significant amount of money, $4.5 million. So it's not just, yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah, the remission figure is in
I might come back again later on. Okay. When
remission figure is number 14. It's the last figure in paragraph 14. Okay, we've got Jeff next.
Sorry, my question was about the impact on the LTP financials as well. So.
Okay, Rob, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. My question is also around the remission. When we get an application for a remission and council incurs costs, such as in on page 91, where we had to go to grey matter to get their view of the transport, do we recover that cost directly from the applicant, or is it something that council absorbs?
So historically we haven't sought these costs, but going forward, remissions under the new policy, we will be seeking to cost recover. So as this is a historic remission that is only just coming to finalisation, we're not seeking these costs, but anything that is sort of new business will be accounted for.
What has been the cost of this remission, perhaps both in terms of external and roughly what our costs would have been?
I can't tell you the specifics for this one, but generally the reports...
100,000?
No. So there'll be maybe like 1,000 to 3,000 for some simple reports. Okay. And then there's staff hours, which we haven't been keeping track of as we weren't on charging, but going forward, we'll know how many hours we're putting into these.
Okay. Are we comfortable with the grey matter report? Given the size of this development, I live just across the road, and I mean it hasn't even opened yet, but the amount of traffic going in and out of that site at the moment is quite colossal. So, you know, are you confident that the grey matter report is an accurate assessment of what transportation movements are likely to be, given that that's about 2.3 million in the remission of the total 4 that we've agreed to remit?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions on Ryman or generally on the remissions? If not, oh, sorry, Gary.
Sorry, and I'm just thrashing around because it's such a big number, and I'm just uncomfortable with it. Not that I'm saying I just want to get more confidence for myself. The remission's greater than the DC's payable, eh?
That's correct.
So, okay, so that just gives me great cause for concern that less than half the amount of demand is going to be driven from this than we thought, given the number of I'm getting tied up with SUIPs. What do we call these things? Hueys, that's right, Hueys, yeah. Than we would have normally. So can you give me some really broad reasons why?
Yeah, so, well, the first thing to look at is what the model would have assumed, and it assumes in a residential area that there's, you know, residential housing, so in that area, say, 16 houses per hectare. And in fact, if you worked out the DC on that, it's actually, it's 500,000 less than, you know, the remitted amount that if you approve today. So what's happened is that the model can't anticipate, it doesn't anticipate things such as retirement homes unless it knows that they're there. So you get this really intensive land use on the site, and the thing that creates this big gap is kind of like a hypothetical number, really, the number that you're remitting in inverted commas, because it's assuming that every single one of these residential units is a full house. So that's where the remission comes from.
So what are the types of things that are going to be overstated from a normal house? How will that be bigger than from one of these things? So I assume you're saying they're older folks and there won't be that much driving of vehicles as you would have if it was just a average family. Is that the sort of thing you've done?
Yeah, so the underpinning thing is, the underlying thing that is the occupancy. So on average, there's about 1.3 people per household occupancy level, whereas 2.7 in a house, and occupancy, generally speaking, drives those HUE metrics. So you can automatically, that's half basically, which is about the remission. So that's kind of where the number, and that's validated by, occupancy reports across a number of, various retirement homes. And we also know, because we've done these before, that the metrics that they've provided and that have been validated through the commissioner hearing are also very similar to the ones that you get for, Somerset and some of the other retirement homes. So we're pretty comfortable that it's right in the bandwidth of what we'd expect. And the thing is, it's just bigger. So, the number is bigger. But again, it's still it's sort of really a hypothetical number, because
Stormwater's zero.
Yeah, because it's on the river, and basically we don't remit, as a council, we don't remit stormwater anywhere really unless it dumps straight into the river. So that's really the only exception that's been identified in the legal literature and the consultant advice. So this happened. This is the situation where it sits on the river.
So it rains.
Yep.
Sorry to be real pedantic. It rains, hits asphalt, because there's a lot of asphalt there now when it hadn't been asphalt, and drains into, or goes down, what do you call them, culverts and things like that, and into the river.
Yeah, well, I don't think it even needs to go through a culvert. Doesn't it run overland and down that gully area and out onto the river? Yeah, and there's no council work, so we've checked that, if it hits council infrastructure, then, obviously that's where we start. It'll still be difficult because it is dumping into the river, but if there's council infrastructure there, then, yep, you start looking at some part of a charge, but in effect, we can't claim that they're causing any costs because there's nothing there between them and the river.
Raw rainwater, well, I don't know if that's the right word, but raw rainwater will just flow off the asphalt down a bank into the river.
Yeah, but they've done works to, it doesn't...
So they've done some stuff to make sure there's no erosion and...
Yeah, as part of the conditions of consent, they've put works in place that, channel it, or you'd have to ask an engineer. There you go, Mr. Allen.
So I think the
An engineer, he said.
I used to be the chief engineer. I think the issue is you can only ask for remission if we had a project in that we don't have to do. But for our rotor we assume that we're not going to do the storm work, that the developer's going to do it himself. So there's no remission because we didn't have any work in to do it. We just assume that we work with the developer to clean up and treat the stormwater that they put into the river.
So are we at risk of underestimating, like are we relying on them to do stuff that we would normally have done, which is totally appropriate, yeah? And we check to make sure that their stuff will work, their solutions will work, and there won't be floods or erosion? Or...
Depends on the area we're working in. For instance, Rotokauri, as you know, we know that...
Can we keep the discussions more specific to this rather than having a great big thing about the consenting process?
But I'm trying to be specific as I can. I'm talking about what actually is happening there, because it just seems...
We need to refer to this one.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm meaning. I'm saying on that site, there's all... Sorry, Chris.
Chris was getting quite lyrical about drainage techniques and philosophy.
Okay.
All I was trying to say, there's no remission because we don't have any works in our program.
Yeah, and from the development which sits on the riverbank effectively to the river where it drains, there's nothing there.
And you're comfortable that there's no adjoining properties that'll get flooded because, it's just astounding the amount of money they're not paying. If we thought there was $8 million worth of work need to be done in there, turns out there's only $3.9 million worth of work to be done, and I just want to make sure we've got everything covered, because it's, once we've signed off, we can't go back to them again, can we, I assume?
No, that's it. I mean, I'm satisfied.
Okay.
There was a commissioner hearing on this as well, where, you know, some of these metrics were established and where positions were confirmed by the commissioner. So in relying on that, that provides you some, you know, that provides you some comfort that that's gone through that process. But we methodically gone through the engineers and, gone through the numbers and peer reviewed them. So it's big numbers, but look, it's the same approach,
methodology.
and I think it's actually reasonably straightforward remission.
So the reserves, presumably that's because they're old folks and they won't be playing in the park. Is that what we're talking about?
Yep, that's
Have their own park? They've got their own green
cost
space
more.
within?
yeah. And look, we don't have the detailed information to know, you know, where or how, you know, they move as
As
such.
we don't
so
with
it's-
anyone.
Yeah, so it's based on occupancy. You just assume that if there's 1.3 people and not 2.7, then the charge is, you know, remitted on that basis. So that's the sort of best information we have.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, Gary asked a few questions as well, which were good. Just curious, if this triggered the old DC policy, if this was under the new DC policy, would they have been initially looking at 16 million and then remitting 8 or thereabouts?
Oh, yep, yep. If the charge was double, yeah. So basically, it would work proportionally. The same principles apply.
And what was the timing in terms of our ruling or changing of the DCs to their lodging of the originals? It was a couple of years in advance, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was significant. They originally lodged in 2016. It's just a really long process with development this size, and because they went through the commissioner.
And also, you mentioned the commissioner, but did we also run this through legal in terms of, because, with Lachlan, he had a lot to do with our DC and that sort of stuff?
The process has been run through him like several times in the past. It's all consistent with what we've done historically.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, councillors, I'm going to put the recommendation number 2 there, seconded by Jeff. Okay, if there's no discussion, no, I'll put a show of hands. Those in favour, against, carried. Thanks very much. That's unanimous. Okay, now, always a brief report, number 10, on page 93. Keith. Come on up. Now, Keith, is there anything that you want to highlight, or are we good to go with questions?
I understand the committee is a little pressed for time, so I'll take it as read and open for questions.
Okay, thanks. So, councillors, some questions on the quarterly report, the market indicator report. Please don't just suddenly go through and find questions now. Well, I'm not inviting that. I'm inviting people that have actually looked at it in advance to ask questions. And I've got Rob first.
Thanks, Chair. On page... I gather you are, Gary. If I've got 10 questions, I'm absolutely certain you'll have 20.
No, I've asked staff not to recognise the button from Gary.
On page 102, you talk there about first home buyer activity, and you use percentages to compare Waipa, Waikato and Hamilton. Do you think the report would be a little more useful if we actually had the number rather than the percentage? Because I would assume that the other two TLAs are coming from a much lower numerical base, and so therefore the percentages, I don't know, to me, don't tell me a hell of a lot.
Yep, no, I understand exactly what you're asking, and I had considered that myself, and particularly we understand that sales volumes have been declining in Hamilton, so yes, that would certainly add to the picture.
Can I suggest that in future reports?
I'll look into that.
That would be good. And just find the other question. On page 98, you talk about residential indicators. And is the conclusion there in the bottom two paragraphs of page 98, does it suggest that there's a better opportunity, whilst you talk about it being cheaper to build or to buy in the other two TLA areas, you talk about the value growth in Hamilton being better. Is that another way for saying that capital values are tending to go up faster in Hamilton than they might be generally in Waipa and Waikato?
Sorry, could you direct me to the paragraph in which that statement is made?
Page 98, last two paragraphs, and you're talking there about residential indicators and the growth in the sales price, or the changes in the sale price. And I just wrote down here, when I read those two paragraphs, does this suggest that there is a better opportunity for value growth, that's growth in the value of the property in Hamilton City residential properties when compared with Waipa and Waikato?
I guess the approach taken with this report is that whilst there is the monitoring of the trends and the change of the house values, it's more from the perspective of affordability rather than the opportunity for capital gain. Okay.
All right, because over the page, you then state in the second paragraph down, the second quarter of 2018 reveals a pattern of price declines across most of the Waikato district and a large increase. And then in Waipa, you've got some increases, but you're suggesting that perhaps Hamilton, and I know you've been selective in particular areas there, but you've indicated that the growth has been, I don't know, the way I concluded that is that the growth generally has been greater in Hamilton than it has in the other two TLAs.
Yep, that'd be
and
correct.
I'm not sure whether that's solely around affordability, because it is generally around residential indicators. Or have I misread that?
No, so it's just looking at the pattern of those residential property price increases over the last, well, there's a quite a long-term trend there. And then looking at the geographic breakdown and just seeing what the quarterly change is to understand what's actually happening below the TA level with some of the price changes and what's actually happening in the market at a smaller geographic scale.
Okay.
So.
All right, no, that's fine. And one last question. Do you think that you've identified in here, and I think this council's already aware that we have got a declining amount of business land available in the city. Are your observations such that we are addressing that sufficiently to bring the supply back to where the demand might be?
Shall I take that?
Certainly. So I had flagged this in a couple of the previous quarterly reports.
Yep,
and
I think we're aware of it. I'm just wondering whether or not we are doing the right, council is doing the right things to address that lack of supply.
There's a number of initiatives underway. There was a report brought to this council on the 6th of September, looking particularly at the deferred industrial land in Te Rapa North, but also that report noted the wider context in which that was occurring, namely the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy and the Corridor Plan. So there is a whole lot of work which Jen might wish to expand on, looking at that issue in particular.
Okay.
So to your question, the conversation around the availability of industrial land will come back to council in December, following on from the meeting that Keith just mentioned, and also that's a fundamental part of the conversation in the Greater Hamilton Growth Strategy.
Thank you.
Thanks. And last questions from Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question, and potentially to the benefit of Mangai Norm. We've had a lot of talk of future-proof lately, and is this future-proof, or is it just part of future-proof?
So the under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity, we're required to collaborate and work with our adjoining TAs who are identified as that, as part of that kind of Hamilton urban area, so Waikato, Waipo and the Regional Council. So Future-Proof was the vehicle for that work to be conducted. And if you recall, there was the capacity study that was also done to meet the requirements of the NPS UDC. So this reporting that's to the benefit of all of the TAs involved it just simply has the Future-Proof label on it, as it is a collaborative effort.
So it's not the summation of what future-proof is, it's just a part of?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Gary, just got in time. Have you read the whole thing in the last 5 minutes?
Hey, the vacancy rates you quote in here, they are all, are they a
Do you want
premise?
to refer to pages, sorry?
Oh, okay, so specifically then page 107, which is page 13 of your report.
What year?
Yeah. Poof. And for example, industrial vacancy rates by precinct. So you look at Te Rapa North and it says last year there was 1.5% vacancy rate at Te Rapa North. This year, or the most recent December 17, it was 2.5% vacancy rate. That means empty buildings, doesn't it? It doesn't mean there is space, land available. This does not comment on land that's available. It's just on-site buildings that are already developed, already ready to go. And so we're just talking about empty buildings here, aren't we? This is not telling us that there's a shortage or a surplus of industrial land. It's telling us that there was a 1.5% vacancy rate of buildings in Te Rapa North. Is that right?
Yeah, so the buildings being a proxy for land. Yeah, the vacancy rate within the buildings. So that with industrial capacity, there is a direct relationship between land and floor space, because generally industrial activity only occupies one floor. We are seeing some activity in Auckland where that pattern is changing, but it is representative of the amount of land capacity. And we have, I mean, this report with this indicator is commercially produced, so it's the nearest.
Sort of my point is, if and 1.5% seems incredibly tight to me, so that, and even now the latest is 2.5% Te Rapa North, which is an area. Because surely somewhere on the line, if there's enough available empty land, that will be developed, and those vacancy rates will possibly loosen up a bit.
Well, that's exactly what you've seen in Te Rapa North, Councillor. That's exactly what you've seen in Te Rapa North. So that their categorisation of Te Rapa North is that Rotakauri and the land on the other side of the railway tracks from the base. So that's what they classify as Rototuna. Te Rapa
This is the
North.
boulevard,
Correct.
Alpha Porter Drive, all that sort of area.
And so there's a number of stages within that have come to the market recently, and consequently the increase within that precinct.
So sorry to be pedantic, but what I was okay, I would like to know from this, but don't worry, there's tons of vacant land there, and it just waiting to be bought and developed, because that is when we need to act. If there's not significant land there to be bought and developed, and does this tell us that?
No, so that some of that finer grained, detailed analysis of what some of those what the availability and what the other constraints might be, that's exactly what's being undertaken as part of these other initiatives in response to this.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks very much. No other questions. Thanks very much for that, Keith. I understand that we're still catching up in terms of the time. We've got another one coming in December. That's right. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, councillors, I'll move the resolution, which is on page 93, that we received the report, seconded by Rob. Those in favour, raise their hands. Against, carried. Thanks very much. Unanimous. Okay, councillors, I'll move the requisite resolutions on page 111 to exclude the for the public excluded section. I'll move, second by James got in first, yep. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Okay, so we'll just wait a minute or so before we start up on there.